Okay, is it working now?
Hi, here we go. How are you?
I'm doing well.
And then I looked at your work too, and I appreciated it was very much fact-based and surrounded really by bringing facts together for you to reach your opinion. So I like that. All right, so my name is Jennifer Coffindaffer. I was a federal agent for over 28 years. My areas of specialty include organized crime, violent crime, also gang investigations, narcotic trafficking, crime aboard aircraft terrorism. I also worked a long stint on the nuclear counterproliferation cases out of the weapons of mass destruction. Also, kind of on the side. And when you're an FBI agent, you have your cases. That's the bread and butter of what you do 10 plus hours a day. But a lot of people want to do other things too. Some people become blood spatter experts. Other people become SWAT operatives. Other people want to be crime scene specialists. So there's all sorts of different specialty areas you can do kind of extracurricularly. So my areas were SWAT. I was on the Dallas SWAT team, the Houston SWAT team, and the San Juan SWAT team. And then I was also a firearms instructor since 1994, and I continue to teach in the private sector after I retired. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell. And I am not assigned to the Delphi case as some sort of contractor as a retired FBI agent, nor was I ever actively working the case, the Delphi case, as an FBI agent. My thoughts and reflections are what is known, that is known to the public as well, and also deep diving different statements and areas that can be publicly found that I'm always looking for. In addition, obviously, my background working cases comes in invaluably, particularly because when you're a new agent, or when you're a new police officer, you haven't made any mistakes yet. I always say I've never learned anything that I already knew. Now that sounds convoluted, but the bottom line is where I learn, and I think everybody, where you gain experience and you grow as an FBI agent in this case, is by making mistakes, learning from it, never doing it again, and knowing the next time you come across that situation, oh, this is what could happen, or this is the area I should go to. So hopefully that gives you some background. Currently, I am the law and justice contributor for News Nation. I contribute on all cases across the board as they arise, and they need analysis regarding law enforcement type cases. In addition, and really the bread and butter of what I do is I'm an expert witness. I have multiple cases from East Coast to West Coast. Most of my cases do involve homicides, but I work a huge variety of cases, use of force cases and other cases. And I'm hired individually, yet through my company, not my company, but through the company I work for, which is Eagle, which was started by other FBI agents, one of my mentors and the head of the hostage rescue team that then corralled several of us when we retire to work for him, not only doing expert witness work, but also doing protection. I'm on the expert witness side. Some people are on the protection side.
Okay. Awesome. So I think it's great that you're an expert witness, and I have questions. And I'll pull up the document about this unspent bullet in the Delphi case, because just doing some research, I mean, it seems like there's pros and cons. I've heard both sides. I kind of like to do that when information comes in. What would the prosecution say about this, and what does the defense say about this? And so I take it with a grain of salt, because if you ask the prosecution, you learn how great the science is on ballistics, and the defense says it's junk science. So hopefully you could kind of fill me in a little bit on maybe the science of it, and then we could get specifically how it relates to Delphi, and if this unspent bullet, if it means anything, if it's good for the prosecution, if it is junk science, whatever your thoughts are on that. I know nothing, so.
Well, the first thing to look at is the fact that this wasn't a spent casing. It's rather a spent bullet. So there's basically a brass casing, usually brass if it's high quality ammunition. It should be brass. And that holds a bullet. And then within the brass is gunpowder. So if you understand just the configuration of a bullet, this bullet that was found was still a casing still surrounded that bullet. So it was never spent. It was never used. It was just a bullet in its casing that had been ejected from a gun. So it's very important to understand that when you fire, in this case, a semi-automatic weapon, there's a lot of inertia and power that goes into loading that bullet into a chamber, having a firing pin strike the primer, having the explosion happen that forces the bullet through the chamber and through the barrel and out of the weapon. And then at that point, when that happens, meaning when you fire it, the casing, the brass casing that held that bullet, has to also be ejected. And how it is ejected is through an ejection port. And there's two mechanisms that eject. One is the extractor and the other is the ejector. Now, an extractor is like a little hook, and it hooks onto that brass casing. As the bullet goes out, then an extractor comes in. It's a separate mechanism, and it flicks the casing out of the ejection port. Okay, so we've discussed now what it's like to shoot a bullet and all that energy that happens, and the energy of that gun making the markings of not only the extractor, but also of the ejector on the casing. And those are typically unique to each gun. Each gun is going to extract and eject and cause a little marking on that brass casing differently from other extractors and ejectors, even if they're the same model. Now, is it pure science like DNA or a fingerprint? No. It's different than that because these are actual markings. So is it possible for another gun, the same gun or same type of gun, to do those same markings? Is that possible? Yes, because it's not perfect. It's not a perfect science in that way. But in the Delphi case, to me, where there is another issue that needs to be looked at is essentially the fact that this was not a fired bullet. This was a full bullet that someone manually ejected. So you can imagine when a gun is operating, the energy involved would make more deeper and vibrant extraction and ejection marks on a bullet than you manually making those marks. So that's a very key piece, I think, to consider. The bottom line is, though, I can tell you that this is going to come down to what they call tool mark experts. And I don't know who the defense will hire. I don't know who the prosecution will use. But there are tool mark experts that this is what they do. All they do is look at this type of a situation, and they diagnose whether a bullet is extracted and ejected from the same gun or not. It becomes more difficult when in this case it was done manually. And this is going to come down, quite frankly, Fig, to a battle of the experts. I truly believe that it's going to be who the jury believes on these points.
Mm. Yeah, and this seems to be one piece of evidence, and but it was a big focal point in the probable cause for the arrest warrant, where what is up with this bullet. And so will one side say, like, maybe the defense will say, they'll try and say absolutely not, it didn't come out of this gun? Or do you think it'll be more like, well, yeah, it's possible that it came out of that gun, the markings show that it could have came out of that gun, but it also could have came out of some other guns that are similar?
I think that's the route they'll take. Or they might say, listen, this was manually extracted. I don't have enough of a ejection mark or a extraction mark to even really make an analysis, kind of like a partial fingerprint.
Right.
Will they say that? I could see this going in a lot of different ways. But what I really do believe is it's going to be a little bit more difficult on the prosecution side than normal. Not only because it was manually spent, but why? You know, that's not what that expert is there to answer. They're just going to strictly answer, listen, this marking matches what this extractor and this ejector do from this particular weapon that was in possession of Richard Allen. That's what they're going to say, right? But a bigger question, I think, in the whole introduction and the explanation to the jury has got to be why? Why was there a round on the ground? Did it come out of the gun? Did he have it in his pocket? Was he loading up? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah. So they might have to try to explain how it got there. Because I know they said in the video there was a sound of a gun cocking, but when did that happen? And yeah, like you said, did it fall in his pocket at that point? And then during the staging, for example, then it fell out of his pocket. And so that's, who knows? And I don't know how you'd be able to prove exactly how it got there.
Right. And if, you know, it happened early on, well, where they came off the bridge was not at all where they were ultimately staged and found.
Right.
So that doesn't make any sense. In other words, did he kind of panic and in the excitement and adrenaline rush of what he was planning to do, did he forget he had a chambered round, and did he rack the action to make that noise to have the girls be more scared and get them to do what he wanted? Well, I don't think he would then bend down and try to find it and pick it up. From somebody who's ejected a lot of rounds, you wouldn't be wanting to do that. So how did it get over where it was found between the two girls in a staged area? The prosecution is going, I believe, to need to allow for some explanation of that.
Yeah, I don't know those answers. I think definitely for intimidation, when you're trying to get someone down the hill to make them be compliant, you might, rack your gun, make it have that cocking sound, and then, but that seemed to be closer to the bridge. And it's still weird about the audio, the things that we don't know. They're like, well, there is more audio. So what audio did we hear? We assume it's at the beginning of the bridge, but I don't know. It's been maybe spliced together, but law enforcement has said on record that there's more audio, but they don't think it will help with the investigation. So it's still us not being able to see the whole picture. It's hard to kind of understand what really happened. And hopefully it comes to light of what actually did happen.
Well, and that's exactly right. I mean, law enforcement has been clear, and my understanding of the case is we have the audio that's worthwhile. Other than that, it's gibberish. It's the girls talking amongst each other. I don't know that there's going to be anything more in terms of the audio that's going to be helpful for this case.
Are you there? Is it working?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, me neither. I was just saying about how the tip came about, and I'm unsure of what prompted the tip for them to go in on September 21st and go into this database and to look up stuff about Richard Allen. I have no idea what prompted all of that. But
My
that's what
understanding is the case was cold, right? It was going cold. And they wanted to reevaluate, which makes a lot of sense to me as a law enforcement officer. When something is going cold and it can't go cold, right? You need to solve it for the protection of your citizenry. All these years have gone by. Seems to me they took another look into every single tip. And I could see Carter saying that. I want every single tip looked into. And so they access Orion, which again would have been the database specifically designed to house all this information. And they grab out this tip as one of the many they probably reevaluated.
Yeah, and in hindsight, as an outsider, it's easy to say, like, what were they thinking? How did they lose this tip? I'll say, as a business consultant for organizations from size 5 to 80,000 people, these things happen all the time. People don't realize that. It's kind of disheartening going into these large companies and there's $1 million errors that have gone on, quality errors, safety issues, and it's usually a miscommunication. There was a dock control issue, or someone assumed that something got relayed, a message got relayed, but it never did. So this, I would say, when I do business problem solving, at least 90% of the time has a communication aspect as a potential root cause of a problem, at least contributing to it. So it's pretty common in the business world. I don't know if you want to share anything on the likelihood, or does it sound outlandish to you that the tip was lost?
Well, I think the word lost is incorrect in terms of syntax. And I've seen the discussion as to, well, it was the FBI's fault, or, trying to sort of pass blame as to how this tip got lost. But really the word isn't lost. The word is, it was filed as a tip, if you will, as a interview more, not a tip, but as an interview that led to nothing. So somebody made the decision when it came in, they looked at it. It wasn't some FBI clerk, because she's just entering everything. That's what her job is, to make sure everything gets in. But she would have been told, or he would have been told, where that needed to go to. In other words, was it designated as a lead? So when something goes into the database, they can put a lead and assign it to that particular interview. In other words, you need to do more with that. To me, this was one that was put in benignly as an interview that was not important. And the people that decide that, as an example, okay, so they had a command post setting, a command post situation. So there's on-team or there's on-site command post leaders. And that changes because you can't work 24/7. So typically the FBI will have somebody on 12, usually a supervisor, and then another supervisor or a case agent on the next 12. So that should have been manned during this time frame. But I recall the FBI didn't get involved till a little bit later. Remember, they got involved later. They did the search warrant, later in March regarding Ron Logan. But a command post setting should have somebody in charge, so that when this officer conducted this interview, right? It was kind of an off the cuff. Hey, I was there. He writes it all up. He gives it to them. That person should have looked at that and said, and I believe they probably did, and said, yeah, he was there. So were a lot of people.
Right. The word they use is unfounded. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but
no problem.
Yeah, it was like a conservation officer. I think he's getting blamed right now. And I'm glad you're bringing this up, because it goes to someone who makes the call, whether it's like you said, a lead, or if it was unfounded. And I saw an article, that word used, unfounded. And I thought that was interesting. To me, that seems like someone made a decision to maybe not look at this person as a suspect, but put him into like a benign witness list.
Right. If in a command post setting, that's how it's supposed to work. The person in charge of that command post should definitely be not privy to, but really make decisions on all of these types of interviews that would have happened. Typically what happens at the end of your shift, at the beginning of the shift, or during your shift, if it's slow, as somebody who ran command posts, you go over and you look at everything that came in during that hour or 2 hours. It just depends on how fast moving things are going. And you read through them. And then you have them designated to go where they should go. And it seems like either somebody dropped the ball that was in charge, that knew overall the case. That would seem to me what happened. Or B, for some reason, that piece of paper never got in front of that person. But we say drop the ball. If you really look at that initial interview, it was pretty benign.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see where it could just get overlooked. And I don't know if you want to kind of read through what that initial interview to that officer was.
Yeah, I could pull that up. I think it was right here. The narrative stated when he was on the trail between 1:30 and 3:30, where he parked, it said that he meant the CPS building, walked to the Freedom Bridge. So he saw the three females, the one was taller. So my assumption was he came forward pretty early before the bridge guy picture. And this is just an assumption, came out, or they just didn't ask what he was dressed like, because that didn't show up in here. But yeah, he just sounds like, he was there. He saw a few females. He didn't take any pictures or any photos, and they wrote down his cell phone information, and that was kind of it. And I guess they met, I don't know if it was impromptu or he called, I don't know how it happened, but at a grocery store with a conservation officer, and then just kind of said, I was there. I didn't see anything. But,
it's unusual. If I were in charge of this command post and that came in, I would have said, just by the fact that this was a white male and we knew it was a white male, and whoever was in charge of that command post would have seen that recording. Whoever is in the know, whoever's the lead detective, whoever has responsibility for running a command post would have seen the bridge guy. So they should have realized, I've got a white male here, and just sent it for a follow-up interview to other detectives that were more in tune with the facts of the case, as opposed to a conservation officer. But, like you said, mistakes happen all the time. And this was a mistake that happened clearly.
Yeah, and that's the question, like, what the hell happened? How did no one else speak up or say anything, especially at the 2019 press conference when they're talking about, we need to know who parked at the CPS building? You would assume that the person who did this narrative, took this interview, was like, oh yeah, that person said that they parked over in that area that we think is the CPS building. So it's like, a lot of things. Why didn't anyone else make a bigger deal about it? And it's us on the outside not knowing exactly what happened, but it is a head scratcher for sure. So some of the recent news is about these confessions that Richard Allen confessed to his wife. I don't know if you've commented on that publicly, or kind of what your thoughts are about just, what that means to you and for the case.
Well, if I'm the case agent on this case and I'm notified by the prison officials, which is who would notify of such a thing, because they're going to be constantly reviewing these tapes and recordings, I would probably do a cartwheel in the middle of my squad area. I mean, these types of confessions that individuals make over the phone to loved ones, even though they realize, and it clearly says over and over again on those telephone calls that they're being recorded.
Mm-hmm.
I find, it's a good thing for the prosecution, but I'm going to very seriously caveat this one. First, we don't know what he said.
Right.
There's 5 where he apparently implicates himself as to involvement. But was it something like, oh, I'm here, they're keeping me locked up, is it, I must have done it. Oh my God, I think I must have done it. I did it. Is it something incoherent like that? Or is it something like, Kathy, I've got to come clean with you. You need to know I did this. This is the deal. This is why I did it. This is what happened. We don't know any of those answers. And then you pile on that. And I have preached about this in social media because it drives me crazy for any case. The number one thing about any case, in my opinion, and the whole reason I'm involved in the true crime community is advocacy for victims. Out of all the people, all the victims, all the cases I've dealt with, who I have on my Twitter page is a picture of Abby and Libby.
Wow.
Why? Because this case is so perplexing. The victim families have been without any sort of justice for years. And the fact that this was recorded, whoever did this, there's a picture of him, a video. It's such a small community. The fact that it has taken this long is just mind-boggling. So I just feel like there's been no justice for them. And I'm concerned that there still isn't going to be. Why? Just house the guy in a jail. Not the Carroll County jail, any jail. Just be consistent in how you treat people pre-conviction. Now I know he supposedly has good accommodations. He's in a 12-by-8 cell. That is not a normal jail accommodation. He's completely isolated because for his safety, the safety of others, all those reasons. That is a big deal. I know he had a pad at some point where he could have some communication, but my understanding is there's not even a television. So he's completely isolated. We have seen his weight completely drop. I've heard 40 pounds. I've heard even more. He's a very little man, actually, in terms of his height and stature. Even though when he was arrested, yes, he definitely was, hadn't missed a meal in a while. But now he's really to the point of being emaciated. Plus, it's just clear to me that now these confessions that could be real confessions are going to be questioned because they just didn't treat him like you are supposed to treat other prisoners pre-conviction.
Yeah, and that's tough because we're hearing, because of the gag order, we're hearing kind of one side of the story on that. And then the other side, when the warden talked, he kind of, in his mind, he debunked those things, said, this is how it is, this is how it is. So it's one of those, we're hearing two different things. I'm always like, well, what is the truth? Is it some of those things are happening? Are they really concerned about his safety? And for justice for the families, like you brought up, I really hope everything is by the book, that things are going how they're supposed to, because definitely don't want to mistrial, anything like that. It's hard on the families too, where like my cousin's trial just ended last month with the murder of my cousin. And we were confident that the person was convicted. He was sentenced. And then to have someone else and say, which there was this person who's in the media, like, oh no, they had the wrong guy. Like, it's very deflating for the family. I'm like, well, what evidence? Like, oh no, they got it all wrong. The real person's still out there and there's no justice. It is deflating when people say that without any hard evidence. I'm willing to listen. Okay, well, what? And then it's just, well, because of corruption or because of this, or they have some other personal reasons where like, well, where's the hard evidence? How is it that person? So I think people should, who are thinking of victims, think really, it's fine. Everyone has their own theories and say whatever you want. But just if you do think about the victim's family, just what that does to them, it makes them seem even further away from justice. If they have the wrong person, right? It's like, we're no further along with justice. So that's just kind of what I wanted to speak up on, just for advocating for victims and the families.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's a great point. This case is going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult at best. There is that other probable cause affidavit that implicates Ron Logan. That will be used by the defense. There's no doubt that they're going to try to show that there's, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt based in part on that. Depending on what the jury, which expert the jury believes, how worthwhile is that bullet going to be? Secondary, or that's two things. A third, were these confessions when he was in his right mind? They're going to show all those pictures of how emaciated he is. I know that, he supposedly was getting papers wet, legal papers wet, and trying to eat them. I'm not sure whether that was before, during, or after these confessions.
It was after.
But that is a serious problem.
Mhm.
Do you have the exact dates of these confessions? Because I don't.
Just off memory, it seemed like right after it was the confession, they did this emergency order, the defense did, and they really got in there. And I think shortly after is when they took the pictures, and his behavior really changed after the confessions to his wife. And I know she recently sold the house. So part of me, this is assuming that maybe he said, again, we don't know what's on the recordings. I have no idea, but nope, I really did this. I love you. So sell the house, take care of yourself. I'm going to be in here for a while. It could have been that, or it could have been, like you said, it could have been something else. But it seemed from the prosecution, of course, what they're saying is he was normal. They did psych evals at the beginning and he was fine. And everything started going downhill kind of after this confession. So I'll get the exact dates so that way we know, and not putting out misinformation. This is based off my memory, but it did seem like that's the picture they were trying to paint, is kind of once he gave up after that. He's like, all right, told my wife, he told his mom, he confessed to his mom. And then after that, his mental health and looks like his physical health started to decline.
He moved from the county jail. Mm-hmm. And they moved him to this maximum security prison. Again, not a medium security prison, not a low security prison, but the harshest of treatment that we can possibly give those convicted. And I'm not a bleeding heart for somebody who, believe me, for somebody who's been convicted. You will not find that in this chair. But pre-conviction, you just have to be square across the board, right, or you risk evidence exactly like what I think they're going to be looking at, risking.
Sure. Because it could go bad. Everything I read about the judge seems like she did an amazing job. She has a really great background. And I hope that everything goes as smooth as possible.
Judge Gohl is great from what I've seen so far. I just, not to beat a dead horse, because it probably seems like I am, but there had to have been a county jail someplace in Indiana that could house him pre-conviction. And I just will never understand this decision-making, especially now that we have 5 confessions that could possibly be at stake, because they're going to argue his mental situation. Now, they're going to have people on the stand that are going to say he was fine, 12-by-8 cell for 23 hours a day is fine. They're going to have a warden say, listen, he had a tablet for some period of time. The other problem I think they're going to have, and again, I'm like you, I really look at both sides of the pancake. For me, I haven't made a decision yet in my mind as far as whether he did this crime, whether he didn't do this crime. My jury is completely out in this particular case. But the big issue I see is that his meetings with his attorneys were recorded. Now, I've read video recording. Now, if it's video, that's both audio and visual by definition. I've also read, no, it was filmed. That could be interpreted without audio. I've read the individual's statement that, listen, we never audio taped it. It was always visual. My whole point is you never do that. You can watch via a camera system. You can't record meetings between an accused and their attorneys.
Right.
You get to see paperwork. You get to see what they're discussing. I mean, it's just so wrong. It's just, they are doing so many things that could possibly mean no justice for Abby and Libby. And I just have an issue with that.
So you're saying it could be like a live stream, but it just can't go onto a recording device. I know audio, no matter what, there can never be audio between that. And that's what I read too, that there was an audio, but there can't even be recorded video of it. It needs to just be live stream. Okay. I didn't know.
Because you can imagine, I mean, and it happens, believe me, we hire people to read lips. We hire people to, the other thing is, I want to see that recording device. Was it capable of audio? If it was capable of audio, you're just going on somebody's word that it wasn't audio.
Right.
You're just putting a dark cloud, and people already don't believe law enforcement. You're putting a dark cloud on the one of our most essential rights, which is our Sixth Amendment right to counsel, not counsel that the other side is privy to our conversations on. And it's just, I'm miffed as to why they would do that. In situations I've been involved in, somebody watches. I understand you need somebody to watch,
right, for safety.
For safety. Even then, believe me, by the time somebody's, thrashing their attorney, it takes a while to get in there.
Yeah.
So now they're saying they're, videotaping it. Are they even watching it?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Or were they just, listen, we're busy with our other duties. We're going to hit the record button. Why? It looks terrible for this case.
Yeah. I hope they went by the book, and I hope they're going by the book. That way we could, if the person's guilty, if Richard Allen guilty, then justice is served. We don't need these little errors or mistakes to get a case thrown out. And turns out he was guilty, but just because of human error, now he's off on a technicality. That would be horrible for the families and the rest of the community who's out there. I know you have a tweet that went out before the Richard Allen arrest, and you could answer on or off the record about kind of Ron Logan, your thoughts then, which, I mean, the bodies were found on his property. How could he not be considered? And then lying about his alibi, of course he's considered. This is me personally, is then when the Richard Allen arrest came and I learned a little bit more, I'm like, okay, it's probably Richard Allen now. I mean, I'm just guessing. I don't know. What are your thoughts on kind of the Ron Logan or Richard Allen, or still just, we need more information?
Yeah, I definitely need more information on this case. I really want to see the tool marks. I really want to see what those look like up on the slides that they're going to prepare. I want to hear the experts explain, what the fact that this is a manual ejection versus a actual fired weapon, what that is going to mean for their tool mark analysis. That is a big one for me. They better be able to, beyond a reasonable doubt, convince somebody. Well, they're going to have to convince a jury, but I want to be convinced as a firearms expert that truly matched that gun. And I have found that evidence holds up great in court. It really does. So I'm a big believer in tool mark experts. I just think that this situation, I've never dealt with a bullet that wasn't spent. I've always, any case I've been involved with is they looked at the casings to match to the guns, particularly in gang investigations. That was a huge part of our cases often with drive-by shootings, with, matching casings from the crime to that particular perpetrator. So this is something we used all the time, and it holds up wonderfully.
Unspent, do you think that will, so the unspent, say it is the markings on this unspent bullet were they matched? I know you said it's like a partial thumbprint, So if they match identical, how would that make you feel, like confidence level that it was cycled through Richard Allen's gun?
That would raise my confidence in the case, but I would still struggle with, how did it get there? He has said he would go down there, right? He lives in that area. I mean, it seems like a lot of people like to take walks down there,
right?
Multiple times. And you're somebody else and you find a bullet. You know, you're walking, you're looking for different things, artifacts, whatever, and you pick up this bullet and then you end up dropping it, or you put it in your pocket, or however could it have made its way to Logan's property in that way? I'm not trying to reach, but it's a reach for me to understand how that bullet got between those bodies, especially since we know that they were brutalized with a sharp object, a knife, most probably.
Right.
We also know, though, that Allen, they seized many knives from him, which I also found very interesting. Will they find anything or will they be able to show that one of those knives was used on those girls? We don't know that information. But my point is, there's a lot going on. He unclothed those girls. Their clothes were found in the river. He had a gun. He had a knife. He was by himself. Was he by himself? There's a lot to be done to somehow have this bullet land between them unspent. It's just something I think the prosecutor is going to have a crime scene reconstructionist come up with a plausible reason for that bullet to be there.
Yeah, I don't know how.
Sorry. And then the biggest thing for me is those confessions. If those confessions give any detail, especially detail that hasn't been disclosed to the public, when they're said, does the person sound like you and I are talking, in their right mind, logical, or is it a babbling fool that you're listening to? There's just all these issues that until we hear those tapes, we don't know.
People say, well, there's false confessions, and yeah, that's true. It just seems, I think they're thinking about all the times where someone's getting interrogated for 5 or 6 hours. But this difference between that is, this was a common conversation with his wife, supposedly. So there was no one who was grilling him, making him do a false confession. This seemed something that he put out there, right? Is that a good way to kind of explain the difference between an interrogation way of explaining it versus how it's more meaningful? I guess that's that way. It's more meaningful or credible when you're talking to a loved one on the phone about it and you're not being interrogated. Is it more meaningful? Certainly
at the furthest end of confessions that are most difficult to explain to juries are those of jailhouse informants, right? He confessed to me. He said this or that. So that's kind of at the furthest end of the spectrum of the prosecution having to sort of legitimize and explain, that it's and have that person get on the stand and explain when they've already been convicted of, Lord knows what kind of crimes, and they're trying to help themselves. So those are the worst confessions, right? Then the second hurdles that can happen are the law enforcement and, confessions, because especially if they're not recorded, people can say, oh, he was coerced, he was made promises, and so on and so forth. So that's the second. The easiest ones are what we have here. It's recording. It's all they have to do is show. They don't even have to have his mother or his wife testify. All it has to be is somebody in the jail that can say, and they'll have a videotape of it. Here he is sitting here. He's on the phone. It matches up with our logs. Listen to his voice. It is him. And he says this, and they're going to have it all transcribed. This is, like I said at the beginning, why I would be doing a cartwheel in the squad area if I believe that individual did the crime. And now I have 5 confessions. That just bolstered the case that you already believed in. So
yeah, that could be
we
huge.
will see.
The 2019 press conference, I say that they're talking to a profile, like an FBI profile. There's others that say, no, they knew who the person was at that time, and they're talking specifically to a person. So what's your opinion on the 2019 press conference? Did it have elements of FBI strategy in there? We're talking to a profile. It was just opinion. Or do you think they specifically had someone in mind?
My opinion was that was right off of the transcript from a profiler, from the FBI profiler. Right. I actually looked at that. I don't know how I got my hands on that, but the profile of this killer, and Carter says it almost verbatim.
Right.
And it wasn't the wrong thing to do, what he said. That's why you get a profiler to speak, because it's shocking how good of a job they do at profiling, dialing down on the person that they're looking at. And they were exactly right. In that community, white male, really exactly the description, though, of two different people, right? A description of Ron Logan and a description of Richard Allen. So it's kind of interesting, that piece of it. Of course, by then, Ron Logan hadn't been charged. Ron Logan had been charged, but just with his probation violations, nothing to do with this case. And he was never charged with anything to do with the case.
Right. And I found the only things that he was going to get charged with was obstruction of justice, but that got dropped when, on Ron Logan. That they dropped that in April 2017. So what they were going to charge him with, they dropped those during his plea deal for his DUI stuff. So I thought that was interesting that
I think that is interesting. I think it was interesting, and I think it was a mistake. I mean, he lied about his alibi. He had somebody lie for him, and it was clearly obstruction of justice. I believe those facts equaled obstruction of justice.
Right.
And that, again, there's just so many things in this case that are head scratching, that just made somebody like me and somebody like you and probably many other people wonder about the quality of this investigation that was done.
A bunch of mistakes. I try not to be overly critical because I'm an outsider looking in. I know it's difficult, but as a consultant, people pay me to come in and tell them what they're doing wrong, what organizations are doing wrong. So I don't feel too bad. I think there was miscommunications, and if they did drop those charges, obstruction charges, it's either they made a mistake doing that on Ron Logan, dropping those charges, or they found something like, now that I know about GPS, and maybe they had Ron Logan's GPS at that point and saw where he was at the time of the murder. So they're like, okay, it wasn't him. He was on the phone at 2:09. We know that he had a 20-minute phone call. So there's no way. So fine, we could drop him. I don't know. I'm speculating, but seems like the two options. Either they kind of cleared him, or they're just, made a mistake and dropped him for whatever reason. I don't know.
Well, and I agree with you. Somebody clearly made the decision. This was not Ron Logan. Ron Logan didn't do this. He's going to go to jail for his probation violations, but that's it. We don't think it's him. To me, that was very clearly somebody made that decision.
Well, on a profile, I think what's interesting is I know they gave 18 to 40. 18 to 40 is the age of the behavior that they saw from the crime scene, not necessarily. I mean, I don't know how they came up with that 18 to 40. Maybe they used the witnesses. Someone said they saw someone who looked younger or not. But I just want to note from me reading on FBI profiling stuff, which is interesting, is that they try to gauge the age of the behaviors that we're seeing, not necessarily the actual age. So like Richard Allen was 44 at the time, and the age range on this profile, or not even the profile, the suspect wanted poster was 18 to 40. So it's like, it could have been 4 years older, but it was more of the behavior. Am I right?
That's accurate.
Okay.
That's accurate. They look at the totality of the scene, the totality of what happened, the totality of all the clues and information they have, and they base it on really the act, but really the whole picture that they have.
Mhm.
But yes, I agree with you. It wasn't based on a witness recounting what somebody looked like. It's the behavior.
Mhm.
And that was interesting when that range was changed, because of course that put Ron Logan clear out of that range.
Right. And especially how young the guy looked. I mean, everyone thought it was an 18-year-old. I mean, talk about family members being deflated. You know, you think it's this, and then this comes out like, yeah, people could say that the eyes and nose kind of look like Richard, fine, but it just, I mean, the curly hair just pops out to me. Like, who has curly hair? I don't know. I've never seen Richard Allen with long hair. Maybe if he grows out his hair. I looked at all of his pictures, and everything's missing from 2017 from his wife's Facebook, which is interesting. I think there is some in December, like at their daughter's wedding, but everything from January 2017 through November was wiped off for Facebook immediately. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, they're going to need a lot of good evidence, because you have to prove without a reasonable doubt that this person committed the crimes. And the confession could, like you said, it could be huge, where it's like, all right, well, some of these things, like, yeah, I guess that is kind of Richard Allen. Well, he confessed and he wasn't tricked into doing it or forced into doing it. It's not a good look. Yes.
Yeah. I have a television.
Oh, shit.
I'm going on in about 15 minutes.
Okay,
so I better go.
Okay. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
We'll talk
Can
soon.
I just say one more thing really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that justice for Abby and Libby, the forefront of what this case should be about. And hopefully there will be justice for them, and the true person will be convicted and put behind bars and pay for this horrific crime against those two girls.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. So hopefully we get justice for Libby and Abby, and they're the ones that we're talking about this case for. So really appreciate your time. Thank you for all your knowledge and expertise. I learned a lot, and I'm sure people who watch us will learn a lot too. So
Thank you. Hope it helped.